Okay, so can I welcome everyone? Say hello, my name is James Sale. I'm here to host the Society of Classical Poets live Zoom reading. And this is the second one in the sequence. And in case you don't know, the Society of Classical Poets is the world's premier organization for promoting classical poetry. That is to say, formal poetry, which is to say, the kind of poetry that has stanzaic, metrical, alliterative, or rhyme-based form, and for the avoidance of doubt, is the opposite of the non-poetry that simply is prose chopped up into pieces. And you know what I mean by that? It's the kind of non-poetry quality, in inverted commas, journals and magazines and masquerading as non-poetry, masquerading as poetry. So that's what we're here for. And this is the second of these Zoom recordings. And the first one back in May had a theme. And the theme really was the winners of the Society's 2021 poetry competition. And we had the choice winners from that competition doing their readings. Today, we have a different theme. And what we're celebrating is we're celebrating the launch of the Society of Classical Poets journal number 9. And when you look at this wonderful thing, you will see that it's actually a very substantial book. It has 304 pages. It's chock-a-block full of wonderful poetry. It also contains 2 fascinating articles. In fact, the introduction by Evan Mantic himself is worth the price of admission, but there's also a wonderful sardonic and searing indictment of contemporary poetry magazines by Professor Joseph Salemi. If you add to that the translations and the incredible artwork that's contained within the book, this really is, well, what's not to like? So do get yourself a copy. It's available on Amazon.com, Amazon.co.uk, as well as all the Amazon dots everywhere. So it's a great book. Please get it, which leads on to tonight's event. Sadly, there's a change to the advertised program. The marvelous Andrew Benson Brown, for personal reasons, can't perform with us tonight. But before we leave the topic of Andrew Benson Brown, I think his spirit, his image is always with us. On the back of the book, in fact, is a picture of the wonderful Andrew Benson Brown, which lives up to his own self-accolade, which is he's very photogenic as a poet. So that's the extra bonus you get if you buy the book. Fortunately, we have a backup plan. We have got 2 marvelous volunteers who've stepped up to do what Andrew was going to do, and I shall introduce them in due course. So what are we going to experience tonight? We're going to experience 8 poems. 4 of these poems are going to be read by the poets who compose them, and 4 are going to be read by poets who admire their work. Where I deal with the poets reading their own poems, I may ask them 1 or 2 questions about the poem they're about to read. So expect a little bit of dialogue between us when we get to that point. So let's get started straight away. And I thought, to start this whole thing off, we needed something strong, really powerful. So I've invited Reed Mcgrath, who is from Hudson Valley, New York, and whom I met at first in 2019 at the Princeton Club in Manhattan. And he so impressed me. He was a really sort of straight, committed kind of guy. And I reviewed his first collection, Juvenilia, for the SCP, and you can find that review on its page if you care to take a look. It's a fabulous collection of poems. And his poem, On Antifa Coming to the Country, is a really hard-hitting and punchy poem. And before I sort of welcome Reed, just let me say, even the title, that word country, is wonderfully ambiguous. Does Reed mean by to the country the nation, or does he mean the country as in not the city? There's an ambiguity there, which the poem itself really, I think, cleverly exploits. So Reed Mcgrath, can I welcome you to our live Zoom reading? How are you, dude?
I'm doing well, James. Thank you for the introduction, and it's great to be with you all once again.
Yes. Well, tell us, before I ask you to read the poem, tell us about the form of the poem, Reed. Tell us a little about the form of what you've written.
It's a sonnet, iambic pentameter. The rhyme scheme's a little varied in the second stanza. But yeah, I usually write in the sonnet form. I love that form, and I think it could be very punchy and strong and solid. So it worked well for this poem. I wrote this poem pretty quickly, kind of composed it in my head while I was out working, and all of this, crazy, tumultuous times that we're living in were just kind of weighing heavily on me. So, yeah, that's yeah.
Okay, that's really good. Well, tell me just one quick question then before we move on to the poem itself. I mean, you've kind of alluded to it slightly there towards the end of what you said, but were there any special difficulties you had when you actually came to compose it? You were kind of out in the open fields, as it were, and it came to you, and it was something that was weighing on you. Was there any particular difficulties you had when you actually came to compose it?
Not particularly. Maybe there should have been, maybe it would be a little better. But yeah, no, it came to me pretty quickly, the way most of my poems do, the good ones at least. So
okay. Well, it was Keats who said, wasn't it, if it doesn't come as naturally as leaves to a tree, it shouldn't come at all. So it sounds like it's coming very naturally and flowing through you. So that's really good. Reed Mcgrath, read us your poem, please.
On Antifa, coming to the country. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Amendment 2 of the Constitution. I'll warn you now, we like our guns out here. Our safes have never been so well equipped. Guns are a good investment year by year. We garner more. The markets all have dipped. Cash can collapse, but guns are liquid gold. Guns are warmth and safety. Guns are land. Ammo's rain that fertilizes food. Destroy your cities, dodo birds, but planned. Excursions here would be a little bold to make in your incendiary mood. The nights are dark, the woods are cruel and cold. Guerrilla games are ours, we like our hand. So if you come with the intent to riot, just know we're armed and antsy to defy it.
Fabulous. Now, let me ask
you
one quick question. It's a great reading. Do you have a favorite line in that poem?
I kind of like guerrilla games are ours. We like our hand. It just brings me back to my childhood, like we just grew up in these woods, playing war games and playing manhunt and paintball. And, I just think, country folk, my neighbors were well prepared for whatever the world may throw at us one day. Hopefully not in the near future, but
yes, you sound like a true American independent now. That's
yeah,
really, really good. Actually, my favorite line, I have to tell you, is I'll warn you now, we like our guns out here. And if you listen to, I mean, they're all great lines actually, but if you listen to that line, I'll warn you now, we like our guns out here. It's so iambic, the beat. It reminds me of Shakespeare's a turn or two I'll walk to still my beating. When you've got to say something really emphatically, you go into this very simple iambic beat and you do it, and you end with the word here, which interestingly becomes a leitmotif for the whole poem, because later in the poem you use the word here, a very inconspicuous word normally, with a capital H, here. And the here becomes, your whole physical environment where, you're giving out this warning sign about this is here. Our space is here. Do not invade our space. I That's incredibly powerful. Very, very powerful indeed. A wonderful poem. So really, thank you very much for taking the time to come along and do it. It's really great. Marvelous.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Now, I've actually tried to choose a poem that's a bit complementary to Reed's poem from Damien Robbins. And Damien Robbins' poem, Stealth Warfare, is about the Chinese Communist Party, which is a theme running a lot through the Society of Classical Poets. It's a big theme for the society in terms of its opposition and antagonism to the CCP. Damien himself is a Brit. I don't know him personally. He comes from the north, and I'm actually living in the south. And you may not know this in America, but people in the north and south, there's a big divide in England between these people. But anyway, so Damien's in the north. He's obviously a good guy, and he's written extensively. And his collection, Organ Harvest, which I myself again reviewed on the pages of the SCP. So if you want to see more about his work and a review of it, then go to the SCP and look up Organ Harvest. But Damien, can I welcome you now? Where are you? There you are. It's great to sort of meet you in this virtual format at long last. A very impressive poem that you've written. Can I ask you a couple of quick questions before we get on to it? Firstly, about, the form of this poem and how you came to write it using this form.
Well, it's a ballad form, and it's 4 feet in the first lines and 3 feet in the second, with a feminine rhyme in the second and fourth, and it just sort of goes jauntily on, so it's a way of things progress.
Okay. Well, you say it goes jauntily on. I mean, actually, ballad forms do tend to be jaunty, but of course your subject matter is very, very far from jaunty. So could you now give us your Stealth Warfare?
I'd just like to give it a few things beforehand. Like people were saying about the Communist Party, they can't take kids sitting down. So I was thinking I would better do it standing up. And another one like, it's not, they can't stand for it. So should I be sitting down or whatever? Anyway, I was going to do it standing up, and I noticed Michael standing up there as well. But it's because that's what the Communist Party want to do. They want to be above everybody. They want to be in the clouds, so I'll stand up to do that, and I'll stand up at sort of this level because they're cut above the rest, aren't they? Really, they want to be like that, and so they can look down on their minions and stuff. But I will show my face. So it's called Stealth Warfare, but it's in the voice of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. And it just says that admire, our virus circulates, our muddy money's hand washed, our fingers whisk jobs off your plate, our clenched fists keep you kiboshed, our narratives are globalized, our brief affairs beguiling, old Sun Tzu's art is systematized, we always rise up smiling. Our strength began with helplessness, like your Atlantic Charter, whose principles our schemes suppress, yet we still play the martyr. Till now, our bent development has met with scant resistance. Your nice intentions we prevent through social isms, distance. You've never seen the likes of us, inscrutable as charcoal. We're succubus and incubus, the world slides down our sinkhole. How many of you know the score? The party is the virus. We bluster about, we're insecure and want you to admire us. Admire our perspicacity, our clever stealth, our cunning. Admire the cesspit certainty, the world we will be running. Admire our slobbed audacity, our Fourth Reich, but more daring. A would-be sin-deep dynasty, a vast reign of despairing. For next we'll mount the seats of God, Muhammad, Buddha, Jesus, while evil blackens grass and sod, with you on knees to please us. I know, I'll sort of bow with my bow tie here.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm in awe of your Dicky bow tie there, actually. I hadn't quite realised till you stood up that you had one on. That is very, very awesome indeed. Now, let me ask you before I move on here, what is your favourite line from that poem, Damien?
It's actually the title, because I think stealth's a really nice word. You know, they've got the stealth bomber as well. but the whole sort of velvetiness of it and what it does, and also war, because I was involved with the Revolutionary Communist Party in London in the 70s or 80s, and I was never a member, but people thought I was. And they had a thing called War, which was Workers Against Racism. And I thought that was a great cover to, sort of to bring people in. They sort of grabbed, it was also, I was men in Hackney with them, which is as you know, it's a big black area at the time. And also an area of disparities between big posh houses and not so well off people. So I like the title the best line.
Yes, well, I think the word stealth is a wonderful word to describe what is going on in the world at the moment. There's so much stealth warfare actually going on, so it's very good. My own favourite line, however, isn't that one, just for virtue of other people to think about this, but because I'm always looking for what I call the quotability quotient. You know, great poems always have lines which you can quote, and I particularly like admire the cesspit certainty. Because actually, this isn't just about the Chinese Communist Party. It's about, actually, funnily enough, capitalism itself. Certainty is what leads so many companies to seeking certainty, not being able to embrace ambiguity, or what Keats called negative capability, this ability to live with uncertainty. The need for certainty drives people to great evil, basically. I think that's a wonderful cesspit certainty. That's a great generic psychological flaw in that line.
Great, one of those things where you read what you, that goes beyond what I was thinking. That's good.
No, it's there. Just trust me. I'm the critic here. Yeah, I know what you're saying. No, I mean, it was Socrates who said, poets write about things they don't understand themselves, but it's sort of actually they get inspired and stuff comes out. So if people see things in your lines that you don't think you see yourself, that's a very good thing, Damien. A very good thing. So thank you very much. It was
very good of you to say it. Like.
No, well, we've had two quite, heavy-hitting, hard-punching poems. So I think we've got to change the mood. And we've got to get away from the dour north of England, I think. As much as I love England myself, we've got to go somewhere where the sun shines, large expanse. Go to the Lone Star State of Texas, where we could meet the wonderful Mike Bryant, a fine poet of Texas. And his poem, Mastering Magic, I particularly like. It's in a totally different mood. But here's the thing. I don't know whether Mike's going to agree with me or not, but I've read something into that which is just so profound. I mean, I can see it as I read it. I thought, Mike's not really talking about magic at all. What the poem is about, it's a metaphor for writing poetry. You listen to this poem, and I ask you, I bet you, when you hear what I've got to say here, you'll hear it yourself. So, Mike, tell us about the form of this poem.
Well, it's quatrains, 4 of them, which is one of my favorite things anyway. I'm going to write poetry. I like to write it like that. Always, to me, it sounds good. It's brief, to the point, and that's it. Nothing to it.
Okay, well, don't keep us in suspense any longer. Yeah. Mastering Magic, which is, of course, in this wonderful book, if you want to get your copy. So, Mastering Magic from Mike Bryant from Texas.
Mastering Magic. Set the questing mind on fire with magic. Learn the ancient lore, then follow through. Effortlessness must be automatic. Forcing sorcery will never do. Wizardry well done is wild. Electric. Perseverance is your greatest tool. If the bones show through the flesh, it's tragic. Practice, practice, practice. That's the rule. Incantations misinform perception. Misconception is your rich reward. Don't reveal the slick steps of deception. What you've hidden shouldn't be explored. Prime your crowd for maximum confusion. Draw each awestruck eye and charm each heart. Set the scene for shimmering illusion. Craft is what you're after. Sell your art. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a favorite line in that yourself, Mike?
My favorite line is a terrible line, except it's just one of the things that I think is really important for everybody. Perseverance is your greatest tool. I think that's what life's all about.
That is a wonderful comment, actually. And Dr. Johnson would agree with you. He said all great works are really achieved through perseverance more than any other quality. So actually, you're absolutely right. I'll tell you what my favorite line is, though. My favorite line is, forcing sorcery will never do.
That's my second favorite.
Yeah. Charles Williams says you cannot, no man can write poetry by willing it. You can't will it, you can't force it. And that is why I think it's such a wonderful metaphor for the whole writing of poetry, because poetry is a form of magic. So that is a wonderful, wonderful poem. I love that. I love poems about writing poetry, those metaphors, or at least when they're well done. Just confidentially, Mike, I mean, as a poet, you do not have the reputation, of course, of, say, for example, Seamus Heaney, who
of course not.
Nobel Prize. I've never liked Seamus Heaney's poetry. And his poem about the metaphor for writing poetry called Digging, where he's digging for potatoes as a metaphor for writing poetry, is the most pathetic, bathos-induced piece of rubbish. There you've got a genius poem, and you haven't won the Nobel Prize for Literature. I mean, there is just no justice in this world.
But James, would you like to know what it's really about?
Yeah, it's about poetry writing, Mike.
I'm not telling.
Answer. That is the correct answer. Now, we're moving on. I've got to leave you, Mike. I'd like to stay with you, but I've got to leave you because we've now come to the poet Tian Moore, who cannot be with us today. But his work, Full Lives, Empty Souls, is going to be read by Evan Mantic. Before I mention Evan Mantic again, I ought to say that Tian Moore runs a Christian fellowship in Vermont and does a lot of good work in that area. Evan Mantic, you all know, he's the president of the Society of Classical Poets. And I just think I ought to say, by way of passing, he's a wonderful poetry reader, but also too, we are all in the debt of Evan Mantic. I mean, what he's achieved for classic formal poetry is literally astonishing. And I think we all owe more to him than virtually to anybody else in the modern world in terms of resurrecting these forms and giving encouragement to so many writers. I have a thing really, which is that there are two sins, two evils I detest in other people more than any other. In fact, when I think sanely, I detest them in myself. But the first of those is ingratitude. Ungratefulness is a really terrible thing. So I think it's really important. We're very grateful to Evan and encourage him in all that he's doing, because he's doing such a fabulous job. And that leads on to what he's about to do for us. He's doing even further. Yes, I'm going to do that. He's about to read Tian Moore's poem, and this poem is particularly interesting. It's actually really a versification or a paraphrase of chapter 6 of the book of Ecclesiastes, to talk about variety and what we're actually doing. Some of you, if you've got a long memory and go back to the 60s, will remember there was an obscure literary talent called, what was his name? Bob Dylan, I think his name was, who actually started to write pop songs about extracts from Ecclesiastes. I think one of them was called Turn, 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 and it made #1 in the American hit parade. And so Tian Moore is doing something a little bit more difficult than writing a pop song. He's converting Ecclesiastes into Dante's terza rima form. So if you've ever tried to write terza rima, you'll know it's an incredibly difficult form to write because of the rhyming scheme that drives it. And so when Evan reads this, what I want you to think about, or one of the things you might think about, aside from the fact what a handsome, distinguished looking guy Evan Mantic actually is, but aside from that, what I'd like you to think about is just how effortless and natural the rhymes appear in the poem, which, given how many rhymes there are. So Evan Mantic, over to you, Tian Moore, and his Full Lives, Empty Souls.
Thank you, James. And thank you, everybody, for coming. So I'll just go into the poem. Full Lives, Empty Souls. There is an evil I have seen in those who live beneath the sun, a man to whom God gives both wealth and riches, and who knows respect among his peers, whose every room is filled with everything he might desire. Yet God does not allow him to consume his bounty, because enemies conspire against him. This is evil vanity. A man might live for many years and sire 100 children, but his soul not be content or satisfied with goodness. Or he may not have a decent burial. He, I say, is much to be lamented, for a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes in death and vanity. What's more, the light of day the stillborn does not see, and nothing does it know, yet it has rest that never is and shall not ever be to him who lives long, but fails the test of goodness. For the same place waits for all, the darkness of the grave. Men will invest their energies and efforts in things small and great to satisfy their bellies, but their soul in turmoil lies, a knotted ball of discontent and vanity. For what does any wise man have more than the fool? What does the poor man have, who has no glut of goods, nor knows how he should live, what rule of life should govern all his actions? He is wise who knows contentment, whose eyes school him more than his vain lusts. It's vanity and grasping for the wind to make of things beyond your reach and ken your deity. Would you contend with God, vain man, who brings to him your folly and your discontent? Add more of fleeting fun and foolish things unto your life. You'll wonder where you went wrong as your vanity increases. Will compounding folly make you wise? You've spent your years in vanity, but God will still be God. For who knows what is good for man? Do you? And will you think this way until you die? Your life is but a shadowland filled with vain thoughts, hard labors, hours of fun, frustrations and defeats on every hand. And look around you. Is there anyone who can make sense of life beneath the sun?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Evan. Isn't it just amazing? These readings, these poems are just sort of just building and building. Evan, did you have a favorite line in that yourself?
Yeah, actually there was one line that stuck out to me. This is the one where he's talking about he sees whose eyes school him more than his vain lusts. This was interesting to me because the vain lusts, it was like you get something that's yours. And to me, it was like the eyes are the beauty of the world that everybody can share in, sort of, you know, the beauty of poetry and music and art. And they're not things that you need to own yourself, but you can, you know, you can love them and appreciate them and be fulfilled by them. And you don't actually have to have it to be yours. So I thought that line kind of stood out to me because I thought it was kind of a metaphor for poetry.
Yeah, excellent. I actually like the concluding couplet, actually, and look around you. Is there anyone who can make sense of life beneath the sun? And when you think this is a biblical text and people kind of attribute to the Bible, like the ideas of certainties and dogma and stuff like that, you know, this kind of pessimism and is anyone can make sense. Can anyone make sense of life beneath the sun? It's just such a heartfelt cry to me. So this is such a rich poem. Such a rich poem, lovely. But thank you, that's a wonderful reading. It's so clear. Now we move on. We started off with a couple of dead serious poems, very heavyweight poems. We had some great magic from Mike, some technical brilliance but bleakness from Ecclesiastes. So it's time for some controversial humor. And I think understanding women is a tall order for any man. But fortunately, we have Don Shook, whose poem, Woman Is, will tell you all you need to know about women. Don is from Fort Worth, Texas, and is an award-winning writer for TV and theatre. Sadly, Don isn't here with us tonight, but my friend Michael Petrak is, and is going to read this poem. And this is a first for Michael Petrak. Michael Petrak has not yet appeared on the pages of the SCP, but I'm hoping shortly he will be able to do so. I was privileged to read an advanced copy of an epic poem he's writing, and he sent me as well an audio version. And I have to say, wow, I was completely bowled over by Michael Petrak's reading of the poetry. His voice was incredible. He had a fabulous reading voice. It's the kind of voice really that you should have a contract with Disney. You know, those kind of walkovers, talkovers at the beginning of films when you get this masculine voices that kind of like, you know, they're really kind of incantatory and they kind of bring you in. So Michael Petrak, I don't want to put him under pressure now, of course, but had, to me, that kind of wonderful reading voice. So I thought to myself, really, who could read this controversial man is kind of woman is poem? I thought Michael with his masculine voice would be just so fabulous to do it. And by the way, he's from Colorado and he has 3 daughters aged 9, 5 and 7. So he knows a lot about women. He's got a wife and he's got 3 daughters. So, you know, he should be in some sense, I think, empathizing with Don Shook's poem. So Michael Petrak, no pressure, but this is your moment to give us Don Shook's wonderful poem.
Thank you, James. Woman is by Don Shook. Changeable and fickle is the woman. Some things she says, and surely thinks her so, defy a logic with a bent to wander beyond the bounds of any truth we know. Her reasoning, like multicolored rainbows whose dissipating prisms on the wane, confuse and yet impossible to alter by clinging to what sanity remains. You do not argue, do not raise your standard. Instead, you only smile and shake your head, knowing any moment she will pivot by saying what she said's not what she said. Recounting then a plethora of failings, your misdeeds by the number she assails, in ills you had buried, she remembers, down to the slightest gist of the details. Astounded, you restrain your urge to strangle and calm your anger like a roiling sea in ebbing tides of quiet understanding that this is how she is and how she'll be.
Well, you know, as he's a newbie, I think, you know, in terms of that voice, we should give him as much encouragement as we possibly can. That's a fabulous reading, absolutely. Now, I'm not going to ask him, given he's got a wife and 3 daughters, what his favorite line is. And for the first time ever, I'm not myself going to venture an opinion as to what my favorite line is. I have a wife too, and I want to keep her. So I'm not going to make any comment at all on that poem, except to say that, you know how some people get upset with controversial ideas and people having different opinions, and they get on their high moral horse and they start grandstanding and virtue signaling? Well, we don't do that here at the Society of Classical Poets. On the contrary, what we do is we invite somebody with an opposite opinion. And as it just so happens, we have another marvelous poem by Anna J. Arredondo, who has written a riposte to this called Woman Is Also. So can I welcome you, Anna J? Hello. How are you?
Hello, I'm well, thank you.
All good? Where are you from?
Also Colorado.
Well, it's a little hotbed, isn't it, of controversy down there in Colorado. So Anna, could you tell us a little about why you felt compelled to write this poem in response to Don Shook's?
Well, I just wanted to add that I have 3 brothers and a dear father and a husband and 2 sons and a daughter. So I'm awfully fond of men also. This is just giving another point of view, another dimension of what women are. And I tend to be considered by myself and others as a very logical, sometimes even overly technically logical person. And so it's one of my pet peeves that women are classed as all being devoid of logic.
Okay, well, can I just say before you read your poem, I've been admiring your work on the SCP for a long time. I think you're a very fine poet indeed. So I'm very pleased now for you to read Woman Is Also by Anna J. Arredondo.
Woman is also. Among a host of things, woman is this, forbearing of the sheer pomposity of condescending man. He is remiss in blowing off her luminosity of thought and insight. His binary vision would have him claim monopoly on reasoning and hold that thing perspective in derision. It is not lack of logic, but the seasoning, the nuanced shading in another hue. So, man, next time you fight the urge to strangle, come taste the rainbow. You can try it too and contemplate things from another angle. If you dismiss her thought, not for some flaw of logic, but because she is a dame, fallaciously you've broken logic's law. Ad hominem, ad womanem's to blame. Now, should she switch to pure ungoverned feeling, which girls, we ought to admit it when we do it, the turbulence at times may leave you reeling. Just hang on tight and smile, you'll get right through it. Learn to discern the two, and as you mull, she's gracious when you do the best you can. You may be one-dimensional and dull, but after all, poor thing, you're just a man.
Thank you very much indeed. And you know, that's a wonderful riposte to the first poem. Can I ask you, what's your favorite line in that poem?
I kind of like forbearing of the sheer pomposity of condescending man. Specifically of condescending men, not all men.
Yes. Well, I get that. Of course, I think all of us feel we dislike anybody who condescends to us. It's a particularly unpleasant experience, isn't it, to be condescended to? My favorite line is, fallaciously, you've broken logic's law. Kind of hits at the male psyche, really, where we think we're being logical, but of course, nobody really is being logical. We're all emotional beings. I mean, Michael Petrak, for example, is in the business of selling of one sort or another, and all selling's emotional. It's never logical. We always find logical reasons after we've emotionally committed ourselves to, you know, whatever we want to have. So I think that's a lovely line. Thank you very much indeed, Anna J. Great to have two great people from Colorado. Marvelous. Now, our next reading is from me. I'm going to read myself, but not my poems. I'm going to be reading In Our Town by Sally Cook, who can't be with us tonight. Sally Cook's a very fine poet indeed. She's a 6-time Pushcart nominee. She is also an accomplished artist who's worked in 2 or 3 national exhibitions across the United States of America. And this particular poem I like for all sorts of reasons. It's got a particularly powerful ending, I feel. It sort of captures the essence of our town, basically. So Sally Cook, In Our Town, in this classic collection. Named for a bureaucrat when it was young, its ways were old. When all was said and done, it was a town where morals had been built into the planks and people had no guilt. Still, some had said there's something in the water. Consider the large local dentist's daughter who envied those who had a better home, punched out our parson's son and broke a bone within her hand. Her father placed a cast on it. Her gown was strapless, As she passed within the crowd, no silent dancer smiled, for they all knew she was her father's child. I later necked upon a snowy stone. The local witch saw, rushed to call my home, and I got hell. But no one cared to ask why she was there. What strange, unholy task consumed her as the blinding blizzards blew? Morality was served. That's all we knew. Sally Cook. I love that penultimate line. Thank you. Consumed her as the blinding blizzards blew. Consumed her. That strange thing, that kind of, I don't know how many of you had childhoods can remember those busybody kind of people, those adults who interfere with us as children. We thought, well, how did they know this? Or why were they involved with that? It wonderfully captures that sense of strangeness as a child you have encountering sort of alien adults. Now, our final poem is Hollywood Interview by David Whitman. David Whitman is another Brit who sadly can't be with us tonight, but fortunately we have the wonderful Susan Jarvis Bryant, the 2021 SCP Poetry Competition winner, who's agreed to step in and read David Whitman's poem. Briefly, Susan, of course, was a Brit, but she's now a Texan. And as you probably guessed, if you don't know, she's connected to Mike Bryant in some significant way. This is a wonderfully sardonic tribute to Hollywood, this poem. And as Susan herself writes such wonderfully sardonic poems about all sorts of things in America, I thought she was the natural person to read this poem. So, welcome Susan Jarvis Bryant from Texas, but as was Kent, my home ground. Yes. Could you now please kick off with our final poem tonight, the Hollywood poem for me? Thank you.
I can, and I'm very pleased to be with y'all today. Hollywood Interview by David Whitman. My marriage failed, they always do. Emotionally unequipped to work things out without a script. We didn't try to talk it through. What do I pay the therapist for? You can't see what emotions mean until you get them on the screen. We left them on the studio floor. The press put all the blame on me. I've always suffered for my art. I threw myself into my part. She threw herself into the sea. And now this nomination. But I have to thank the cast and crew and the director. That guy knew exactly how much grief to cut.
Did you have a favourite line, Susan?
I really loved that I threw myself into my part. She threw herself into the sea.
That's going to stand you. I've got it. If it was one line, I've always suffered for my art. I mean, the number of actors who say, I've always suffered, you know, that's such a, but then she threw herself into the sea. I mean, it's a weird form of divorce. I love that. Yes, we're in agreement. That was a classic moment, wasn't it, in the poem? Now, thank you so much for doing that. Thanks for all the readers. We do at the end, and we are now reaching the end, just have that little bit of Q&A at the end. If people want to ask any questions about what we've done or make any observations, are there any such queries, questions, or anybody wants to contribute anything at this moment in time? This is the moment to do it. It's been a lovely evening for me. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
I have one technical question. The sound was cutting out occasionally. There'd just be a patch where everything, it didn't matter who was speaking, there'd just be a patch where there was no sound. And I don't know if that was my computer. Did other people experience that?
We did.
Sounds like Brian did.
Yes,
Brian?
I experienced that also.
So this was everybody. Is that right?
No,
it looks like Michael did not.
No, it was perfect the whole time for me.
Perfect the whole time. Okay. So it might depend on whose computer it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't aware of it. I was concentrating, of course, on the readings, but I wasn't aware of it.
You would have noticed. Yeah, you definitely would have noticed, but it's probably my internet is what it is. Yeah. Okay. Thank
Well,
you.
I have a question if we have time.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, this is Mark Stone. I'm actually outside at my son's baseball game, so I'm listening to the poems and watching the game. My 2 questions for any poets who would care to address them. Number 1, what is your process for having your poems reviewed before you send them out for publication? And question number 2, how do you know when a poem is quote unquote finished? Did those come across?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think anybody can unmute themselves and answer, right?
Please let anyone, please.
Well, I was going to answer the second question and just say that my poems are never, ever finished. I always go back to poems and think, oh no, I need to do that. I can't believe I sent it out like that. They're never finished. I have to stop myself from reading them and move on. I don't know whether anybody else feels the same about theirs.
Thank you.
I think actually, both answers are correct on this. I mean, I think the greatest poet of the 20th century was, I personally think the greatest poet of the century was W.B. Yeats. W.B. Yeats revised his poem relentlessly throughout his whole life. He never really finished a poem, although we have a collected works and they're finished. But he was constantly revising, which is the exact opposite in a way of Keats's. If it doesn't come naturally, like leaves to a tree, it shouldn't come at all. So I think there's space here for both positions. You can actually endlessly revise, and or you can actually be inspired and it flows in one hit. And we've heard about that already tonight, it just coming quite naturally to people. So I think both are true. It depends really on your temperament and how this works for you. I've now forgotten what the first question was though. What was the first question, Mark?
The first question is, what is your process for having your poems reviewed before you send them out for publication?
Anyone got a view on that? To clarify what you mean, Mark, are you referring to the idea that when you've written a poem, for example, you might share it with friends or critics or people who know your work to get feedback on it before you send it to somebody?
Yes. I mean, some people will maybe post it on a workshop website. I do that sometimes. I always run them by my wife or my sister. So I'm just curious what other people do, if they care to comment.
I always run mine by Mike, always. And he does the same with me, you know. And we try not to be too critical of one another.
It's very important. It's very important to if you're going to do this, I think the key thing, it's like anything else, it's like business as well. I mean, basically, you need to surround yourself with really positive people who have your welfare at heart. It's very easy to snipe at people's achievements and to cut away at what they're doing. So one of the golden rules I try to practice, I wouldn't say I'm 100% perfect, is for everything you see, I mean, the person who did it had a positive intention in doing it. What is the good in what you're seeing, as opposed to immediately finding the negative in what you're doing? So I think surrounding yourself with people you trust and who've got a view on things, they don't have to be experts, but they have a view, is a good thing. It's a good thing to do.
You know, with Susan, when she writes at a furious pace. And so when she's finished with one, she already said she's never finished. So when she asks me for my critique, she's really not asking for what works. She wants to know what doesn't work and why. And so we never have any problem with that, because she knows that I'm not doing it for a bad reason. I'm just trying to do what she wants.
That's fair enough. That shows a very high degree of trust, of course, when you could really.
And I want him to understand what I've said. So if Mike doesn't understand it, other people won't.
But part of the problem is our different languages.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. the fact that, I come up, he helps me with my Englishisms. He goes, no, we're going to get that. Or you can't put that. Nobody says that in America. It's so rude. So he helps.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, great to see you again, Mark. And I love those crazy shades you're wearing.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Because somebody who works for the CIA. I mean, you've got that look about you. Okay. There's a question on the chat thing. Mary Gardner said, should poetry be read to show off the rhymes or to elide over the enjambment? That's a very, very technical question. I don't know the answer, but I'll give you one answer, which I think is the true one. It depends. It depends on what is the most important aspect of the meaning that one is trying to get across. We have to keep in mind that enjambment and rhyming are technical devices which don't exist in their own right to be just what they are. They exist to create further meaning. So when you look at what you're doing, you'll notice there was quite a lot of enjambment in the poem that Evan read. It flowed over. So, and in a sense, given the number of rhymes that were in that poem, that was probably a good idea, because if it kept end rhyming, it would create a closed kind of situation. So, the length of the poem might affect whether you read over the enjambment or whether you dwell on the rhyme. So I think this depends upon really the meaning at the center of what it is you're trying to say, which lends itself to a kind of ambiguity as to what the meaning is. So there's no yes or no here. I hope that's a helpful comment. Mary. Does anyone else want to comment on that or
I have a question, James.
Michael.
One of the struggles I have is with meter. And I wondered if anyone has any tips or process to, what I found is if I write and just write and write and write, then go back and try to think about the meter, that's a better process for me than as I'm going thinking about the meter. Anybody have any advice as to that?
Practice. It would be wrong to say one way was better than the other. I don't think there's any. You see, in a way, if you look at again the poem that Evan read in Terza Rima, that was prose. But one is able to versify this, and I don't use the word versify as in a derogatory term. I use it as a good term that hopefully the verses eventually become not just verse, but poetry as well. But we've got to start at the basic building blocks of what it is. So doing the process you're doing seems to me a perfectly reasonable way of going about it. But I think you'll find the more you go into meter, the more meter sort of is part of your pulse, the more you'll actually find yourself falling into a natural rhythm. Particularly, and most people who've read my prose stuff will know I'm obsessed with iambic rhythms, because it's the natural rhythm of the language. It naturally forms from the noun, verb, and pronoun collocations, and it's also the heartbeat. It's a didum, a didum, a didum. So basically, this is the primary 90% of all great poetry is written in iambic. It's inescapable. And so if you think about that one point about of course, trocheic's interesting. Of course, dactyls and anapests are great. They've all got their place. If you think about large amounts of stuff you're writing, it's actually mastery of the iambic, which of course leads itself to variations and substitutions. It's not just de-dum, de-dum, de-dum. That is monotonous, but that basic pulse that you're coming back to at some point is something to keep in the forefront of your mind.
Well, yeah. And I will say, this is Mark Stone again. I get the ideas down first. That's the most important. And get the content down, and then you can adjust it to make it fit the meter. So I use that same approach.
Yeah, good. And Mark, by the way, Michael writes some fabulous. He's very clever in some of his metrical, ingenious kind of things that he does. So he's really good at it. So you can get very technical after you've got the ideas down, or you can try and do it directly. So great.
Thank you all.
Anything else from anybody? Well, it's been really good, hasn't it? I don't want to prolong this. We're near on the hour. So this has been really fabulous. I've really enjoyed being with you all. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope we can do it again sometime soon. So if that's it, Evan, you think that's it, maybe?
I just wanted to ask, what time is it in Australia to David?
It's almost 5 a.m. now.
Thank you for joining us.
Send him a medal, Evan. He needs a medal. That's a medal.
No, it's been very enjoyable. Thanks, Joe.
I'm about to sign out. I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, James.
The SCP.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.